Welcome back to Plant Field. So, this is going to be a very different episode to usual. Normally it consists of me and a guest. However, no guest this week. I put out a few boxes on, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Reddit for you to ask me questions. Because I know when I do a Instagram post, anything like that, where it's a Q&A, there's a lot of questions that come up that are to do with, a multitude of different things, such as, the podcast, nutrition, veganism, plant-based eating, etc., etc. And I'd love to be able to answer all of them. However, I never can. So what I've done is I've collated a few of the questions that you've given me. And hopefully we can answer as many as possible in the next hour or so. The reason I did a Ask Me Anything is mainly because when we do these Q&As also, there's a lot of questions about me. And especially when it's on a nutrition page, you do want to kind of get the nutrition ones out of the way first, as that's what many people are there for. And, the ones that do want to know a bit more about me, then here we are. And I do love the fact that some of you want to get to know me a bit more, because I think I assume that, especially when it comes to the podcast, that you may be going onto the podcast to see the guest in question that's on that week and, hear about them, hear what they've got to say, hear the science behind whatever the subject is. However, it didn't occur to me that some of you may just be following because of what I'm doing. I have no idea. But for that, I'm really, truly grateful. It was never in my wildest dreams that I think I'd build a following on the podcast of a few thousand. I never thought on the podcast I'd create a following of a few 100,000 people listening over time, which is incredible. Never in my wildest dreams did I ever imagine that. However, you guys have been here supporting me from the very beginning, which is absolutely amazing. And the support that you've given me has, allowed me to bring in sponsors. It's allowed me to bring the guests you want, the conversations you've wanted, and the topics of question. And I really think that without you guys, I don't think a lot of this would have happened. So I am truly grateful for each and every single one of you that watches this show. Anyway, enough about me. I say that some of these questions are about me, but what we're going to do is we're going to go through the, I think, 10 to 11 questions that are there. Sorry I couldn't do every single one. I wish I could. However, I've done a mixture of ones about me, ones about nutrition, ones about the podcast, ones about everything. So we've got about 10 to 11 questions, maybe 12, if we've got time. However, without further ado, it's really weird because I'm not starting off this podcast as I usually do, which is, a little bit about the person and then welcome to Plant Field. Let's dive in. So, yeah, that's different. So anyway, the first question, and weirdly enough, I get asked this one a lot. And that is, how old are you? And I don't know whether to take that as negative or a compliment, but I'm just going to take it as a compliment. But I am 32 years old. I am 33 in a few months' time, in June. So if you want to get your gifts ready, June 26th is the birthday. I've had people over the years tell me I look different ages, and I think that really goes with the different hairstyles, the different beard lengths, the moustache lengths. Sometimes I do get older, so I'm 35, 36, I've been told, but also been told younger as well. I've gone from the 27 to the 30 range as well, which amazing. What a compliment. Years ago, last year, Somebody did say I looked 21. I know they were lying. I know for what they were lying. They were just trying to make somebody feel better. Not that I needed it, but the compliment's there and I'll take it. But yeah, I'm 32. I'm coming up to 33, and for me, I think I look my age, but I think we all think that when we're there. Another question was my dream job as a child, and I never ever expected that I would be in nutrition from a child. I don't think that even crossed my mind, mainly because when I was a child, or teenager, much like many of us, don't really care about nutrition. I know that's actually changed quite a lot recently. The younger generations care a lot about well-being, wellness, becoming alcohol-free. They're looking after their nutrition in whatever way that looks, whether that looks like a clean omnivorous diet, a pescatarian diet, a whole foods plant-based diet. We're seeing a huge rise in people tending to look after their health, but with that also, that really comes with the fact that people then get lost in the information that's out there, and then that's why you get things like, the carnivore diet. And I know I really do hate on the carnivore diet quite a lot on the podcast, and also in the content that I do. And that's not towards the people doing it, that's towards the people promoting it more than anything. Because I think when you are lost and you are looking to become healthier, you are looking to become more nutritious in yourself, you do tend to just follow the information that you think looks good. The information that may not be accurate, but it's presented to you with, confidence. It's presented to you by somebody with a high stature that looks amazing, that may not be following it to a T themselves. You don't know the ins and outs of those diets. And I think with that, we then get a large population percentile following a trend. And we've seen this in the past. We don't really see it as much anymore. We now see it with like dietary fads like carnivore, or, we can even have it in our own community, which is the whole foods plant-based community. You get some people that will say extreme things that aren't necessarily true, because with nutrition there is also nuance. And I think without that science knowledge and the knowledge of food, people can get very lost. They can get, sucked into a narrative that isn't exactly true. But some things work for some people, some things don't. But also they're taking these from anecdotal evidence. Which is a shame, because anecdotes, they work for some people, but for the large majority, it worked for that individual, not the rest of the population. So when someone goes, carnivore, for instance, and they cure all these diseases, it's really about what they kind of took out of that diet, not what they're just eating and what they're putting into them. And that's the same with a whole foods plant-based diet as well. Like if you're going to go from eating maybe an overly processed, an overly processed diet to a whole foods plant-based diet, you're going to see amazing benefits as well. So we just need to remember that. However, we've completely gone on a tangent really from what the question was, which was what was my dream job as a child. And I don't know how we got there. However, my dream job as a child was to be an actor. I actually did a lot of performing arts when I was a child. I did a lot of theatre. And my dream was to become an actor in the realm of TV, movie and theatre. And I did that for a bit. I did manage to pursue that. I did manage to star in a few music videos. I did theatre quite a lot, and I did a few smaller movies. And when I say smaller, they are still small, because I think the the one that in particular that I remember the most, and I'm not going to name it on here, seemed amazing when we were shooting it. However, when it got to the premiere of it, it turned out to be one of the worst films on this planet that I have ever seen. And that's not down to the cast or the crew. I just don't think it was implemented and executed in the way that it had been seen. However, it got some of the worst reviews that I've ever seen for a movie. So I'm never going to mention what it is, and hopefully it never ever gets released. But there's always those times when those really bad cult movies kind of shine in the limelight, and I'm hoping that's not one of these. Fingers crossed anyway. But yeah, did a few, music videos, did a few acting gigs, did a lot of theatre, and it was a lot of fun. And I feel like I still have that in me. Do I want to pursue it anymore? Not really, but I still have a giant love and admiration for the art, whether that be, the people developing, the people working on it, the people inside it, the scripting, even the CGI sometimes, like incredible work that has to go into these things. It's not just a small task. Which also did lead into the next question, which was, what jobs did you have before this one? And I've had various jobs over the years. In my 33 years of life, I have had a myriad of different jobs that do not correlate with each other whatsoever. I actually had to write a list earlier, and I still think I've missed out quite a few. So my first ever job was when I was 16, and that was in McDonald's. I worked there for all about 3 to 4 weeks. It wasn't for me. In no particular order, I have been a marketing manager. I am, and I still am, a nutrition advisor for Good for All. I was a head chef in Sydney at a place called I Should Be Souvlaki. I was mainly on the evening shifts, working with the more upscale food, as well as the lunch times when I was just doing, souvlakis. But they had kind of a posh dining menu, which was a lot of fun. It's, as I think anybody knows, chefing is a hard job, let alone being a head chef in a busy restaurant. I did that in Sydney, a place called I Should Be Souvlaki. I think it's now changed to Mina Maria's, so if you're there, head down there. The food is incredible. I also supported people with disabilities when I was younger. I've worked in a call centre selling insurance, pet insurance. I've worked in Audi. I've worked as a creative supervisor for a women's fashion brand, which was Rockamilly. I worked in party islands. I used to work in a party island called Kavos. As you can tell, my life has changed since then, because back then I did not care about nutrition or health, and now I do. I think there's probably so many more jobs out there, but I can't remember all of them. I should probably write a kind of intensive list throughout the years, and now, now what I do is I am a nutritionist. I do this podcast, a podcast host, a nutrition columnist on certain magazines. So whether that be Veg Club, VLand UK, Global Vegan, Inside Small Business, I'm a nutrition columnist in those. And also, nutrition advisor for Good for All. And that's still in the pipeline when the food and the product comes out. So I'll keep you updated on that. And I think I do a bit of educational speaking once in a while. So we can count those as jobs as well. So the next question, this one's about nutrition, and it was, I'm worried about iron. It's still the only nutrient I worry about. Am I good if I just eat good with vitamin C? And this one is a very nuanced subject. I wish it was simple. It isn't, not for everyone. However, what I'm going to say isn't surface level or baseline. It can be beneficial to everyone. But if you have low iron and you are eating good and you're taking all this advice, then you should probably see a medical professional. So when it comes to iron, we have two things. We have non-heme iron, which is plant iron, and we have heme iron, which is animal iron. Although they work similarly within the body, they are slightly different. So heme iron from animals, your body doesn't know when to stop absorbing it, so it can overabsorb. And this can cause conditions, iron overload, which is when you get too much iron, and then that leads to various different chronic diseases. Whereas plant iron is a bit harder to absorb, but the absorption rates are more beneficial. But your body knows when to stop absorbing as long as you are absorbing. Your body knows how to regulate it properly, and there's no chance of iron overload. And there's really no risk in chronic disease from plant iron. So, there's a double-edged sword there, which is that why heme iron is readily absorbed into the body easier. It also comes with some negative effects. Then we look at non-heme iron, and it's harder to absorb, however regulated, and doesn't come with those negative effects. It comes with very good effects. So with that, we need to look at absorption, and that absorption really depends on the person and that person's diet and what they're doing around that. My main advice for this would be, firstly, when you're eating your iron-rich meals, avoid caffeine an hour before and an hour after. Caffeine has tannins inside it, and tannins block absorption of iron, or they can down-regulate the absorption of iron. So these are things like your tea, your coffee, your caffeinated drinks like your Coca-Cola, your Sprites, anything with caffeine in it, and that does also include green tea. It does have caffeine. They do involve tannins, and that can, and that can block iron absorption, and that's not what we want, especially when we're looking to absorb more. So avoid caffeine an hour to an hour before and an hour after. If you can avoid it prior and longer, absolutely fine. You're going to have a lot more chance of absorbing more. Then eating vitamin C rich foods. So they can be like, let's say for instance, so you have a iron rich breakfast, and you have some fruits, you have some like berries, oranges, anything that's vitamin C rich with those foods, you're going to absorb more. It draws in the iron and implements it and lets it absorb more. And that goes through all food, your lunches, your dinners, your meals, as long as you are eating iron-rich foods, which is a key right there, is iron-rich foods. So we need to be looking at what is our iron-rich foods. We then need to look at how they look within a meal and what can we add to boost absorption. So let's say you have a lentil dal, for instance. Can we add in, some red bell peppers? If we can, great. That's going to help boost absorption. Maybe we can squeeze a bit of lemon juice in there. That's also going to boost absorption. I think we need to look at what those things are when creating the meals to help boost absorption. And there is a bit of science around this, and using an iron skillet pan when cooking. However, I think depending how old the pan is really going to depend on how much of this iron is being absorbed into your cooking. So I wouldn't say that's reliable. However, always great to use an iron skillet pan, but I think there's at some point only enough iron it can kind of give you from it before, not allowing any more to be taken. With that, I wouldn't say that's a strong indicator of your iron health. Use it sparingly. I would say use the other two pieces of advice first. But yeah, if you do and are still low on iron after those, then I would say seek a health professional, because it might be that there's something else going on, but wouldn't worry too much. Also, I don't like to advise supplements for everything, because I don't think there's any need. I think there's a need for some supplements, just not all. So if you are low and you're doing everything, and this can work on all diets as well, is take an iron supplement. Because what we do see is a lot of people like to say that plant-based eaters, vegans, are deficient in iron. But the highest percentile of people with iron deficiencies are not vegans, and they are not plant-based eaters. They are omnivorous people. So it's a fallacy that we are going to be low in iron. But we should be looking after it. We don't really want to fall into that. However, you know, take your iron, eat your iron. You'll be fine. So next one, which I mean can help me plug myself really, which I'm not very good at doing, which is what do I get if I work with you? So I do a variety of different plans. They are all bespoke and tailored to you and your specific needs. Your bio-individuality, because not every single one of you is the same. You will have your specific likes, dislikes, needs, and not all foods are going to work the same within you. And you may not have all the same goals. So a cookie cutter approach is never going to work for every single person. So what I like to do is look at the individual as a bio-individual person with a bio-individual system that is regulated by different foods and needs. So I'll look into that. There's a large questionnaire survey that gets sent out where I get to know everything about you, and then especially your goals, whether that be weight loss, weight gain. Maybe you're training for an athletic goal. Maybe you're doing high rocks. Maybe you want to do a marathon. Maybe you're into CrossFit. Maybe you're into bodybuilding. Whatever that is, and then I formulate an exact plan that works for you, and I check in with you every single week. Or as much as you want, to see how things are working for you, and keeping a diary also, because I want to know how things are working for you and how they make you feel. Because let's say, for instance, that you're eating over the week and 2 of those days you felt a bit sluggish. Was there something in those 2 days that correlates with why you felt sluggish? And let's say those 2 days had lentils. Maybe lentils isn't working for you. Lentils don't work for some people. The enzymes we have don't always have the ability to break down the exacts. So let's say there's lentils in both those meals, and that's the only thing that really correlates. Then for the next week and forever, we will take out lentils and we will replace that with something else that will help you achieve your goals. I'm just using lentils as an example. And hopefully that would have helped you. Hopefully that would have alleviated any pain or discomfort or fatigue that you may have got from that food. However, if it carries on, it might be something else. It might not have been the lentils. And with that, we may add that back in. But with that, with every plan, they are 4 to 12 weeks, tailored to you, very bio-individual to you. Accountability, weekly check-ins, making sure everything's working specifically for your goal and your nutrients. And then you get a breakdown of every single nutrient within your body over that week. So that will go from, your proteins, carbs, fats, etc., to all your B vitamins, to all your macros and your micros. So that'll be your copper, your selenium, your things like that. I do recommend, obviously, a B12 supplement on that, as that's hard to find. And if you're eating seaweed and things like that, I wouldn't really recommend an omega-3. However, if you're not and you're relying on nuts and seeds, maybe I recommend taking a supplement of that as well. However, you get a lot of resources alongside that as well, to help you move on later on down the line without me, because you shouldn't really have me a year down the line. You shouldn't, realistically. I'm there to teach you about nutrition. You get one-on-one support, you get to ask questions, you get to find out as much as you can about nutrition, and I will help you as much as you can about nutrition, to the point that you can go off and do this on your own and you don't need to think. However, obviously I do understand if people have goals, like they are training for a marathon or a high rock, something like that, then they may need to be with me for longer, but they should be able to implement their own foods, their own plans afterwards without me. So yeah, I would love to say that I'd keep you guys forever. However, that would be unfair on you, as much as I would love to be hanging out with you and talking to you constantly. But the goal is to make you independently, nutritionally available. However, you can find everything like that on the website, which is www.plantfueled.co.uk. That's enough about me trying to plug myself there. But thank you for the question that was asked. Next one was you talk about Brazil nuts not being the best source of selenium. I do, and that's very recent for me. So I've always been saying that, 1 to 2 Brazil nuts a day will give you your daily source of selenium. And for a long time, that was the outlook of how we should get our selenium. Or the best way to get our selenium in basically a supplement form, but just in the form of a nut. However, there was a study recently that took quite a few people from omnivore communities, vegan communities, plant-based communities, all different communities, and gave them all Brazil nuts. And they gave them Brazil nuts from the same farm, and then they also had Brazil nuts from various different farms, and every single one had varying amounts of selenium, it turned out, which means that the soil that they're grown in, the selenium-rich soil, where the selenium comes from at first, is depleting. So you could have, let's say, a bag of Brazil nuts that lasts, let's say 6 months. However, it could be depleted soil selenium, which means when you've taken that in, you wouldn't have got enough selenium anymore. But that could also be the same with high amounts of selenium in a bag that may have higher selenium, but you also could have a mixture of high and low nuts. So what they did, they turned all these Brazil nuts into a Brazil nut butter, and then fed this to people as well, and said that if that changed anything. And it was more consistent with results. However, there was lows and highs and advantages and disadvantages between different butters as well, due to the different Brazil nuts. And this is purely because selenium quality in the soil is depleted. That's literally why it is. So Brazil nuts, yes, 2 a day would have been the perfect way to get all your selenium per day. However, that's not so much the case anymore, unless you have a Brazil nut testing kit with you at all times and you can test the selenium quality. However, I assure you, most people don't. So yes, having a Brazil nut is still great, but also look into some other selenium-rich foods as well, to really kind of boost that up. Next one, also much like my selenium, which is potassium is not very high in bananas. It's not. I think it was sold to us that bananas were high in potassium because they were easy access foods that all of us, near enough, have access to. They're cheap and they are nutritious. However, they are not the potassium powerhouse that we all thought. Part of this question was, do you actually hate bananas because you worked in a banana farm? That's another job I forgot about. So when you go and work in Australia, or move to Australia, you have to go do 3 months on a farm or hospitality. I chose a farm. I got put on a banana farm for 3 months. And although it was a great experience, I also then had a hatred for bananas afterwards. Go figure. But that's not the reason I hate bananas. I actually do like bananas again now. I eat them again. It's just taken about 4 years to get used to the thought of them. You really get put off bananas when you work on a banana farm and just see them constantly going around on chains, and when they're being picked, there'll always be a few off ones or broken ones or moldy ones, and the smell of bananas after a while really just puts you off bananas. However, there are better sources. I would also like to say that, not that I'm recommended this, but Reese's Pieces have more potassium than a banana. So that really says a lot about the banana percentage. Almonds are a great source of potassium. You've got your sunflower seeds, great. baby spinach, just spinach in general, doesn't have to be a baby. Um, avocado, broccoli, sweet potato, Swiss chard, beet greens. They are great sources of potassium. You don't have to be having bananas. It was just sold to us that these are the powerhouse, and they are not. If you don't like bananas, don't eat them. There's other ways to get it. If you do like bananas, keep eating them. Doesn't matter. Should I supplement B12? Yes. Everybody on this planet should be. I don't like the notion that some communities shouldn't be, or some dietary tribes shouldn't be. We all should be. B12 actually comes from the soil. We need cobalt rich soil, and that then produces cobalamin, which then used to help grow our plants. We used to be in the waters in our streams, and when we were, a little less civilized, we used to eat unwashed vegetables and drink from streams, and that gave us our B12. However, we use fertilizers, pesticides, whatever these days, and that stripped the soil of B12. So people then assume it comes from animals. Also a fallacy. It doesn't come from animals. That also comes from the soil. However, because they are eating also from depleted soil, they are normally supplemented these days. Also, whether that be through injection or in their feed. Which means a lot of people from all different dietary tribes do and can have B12 deficiency. So we should all be taking a supplement, maybe depending on the percentage of it, if it's 1,000 micrograms once a week. If you've got a supplement that's 150 to 250 micrograms, one a day. But we should all be looking for a supplement. That doesn't mean that your diet is flawed. It just means that we live in a different world now, and what we used to be able to get hold of isn't exactly what we can get hold of now. So we need to really look into that and make sure that we're thriving and we're taking the nutrients that we need. And I think it'd be wrong of us to say that if somebody was eating meat that they're going to be immune from B12 deficiency, because we see that as a rising thing still, as we evolve still, especially when it comes to things like factory farming and the actual produce that's being created and how healthy that is. Especially when it comes to a factory farm, I don't think any single one of us can think that's healthy conditions, and those animals are being treated right in any way, shape or form. So I'd be very cautious on the quality of the meat and the quantity of the B12 inside of it. Which then leads to the second question, which is, do you hate Paul Saladino? I actually wrote an article about this on Substack. Weirdly enough, the article or the question about Brazil nuts is also an article I wrote on Substack recently. So what I do is I'll link those both below. Go check out the Substack, subscribe. Great little platform. I write a lot on there. Do I hate Paul Saladino? No. I actually quite enjoy him. Yes, our views are very different. Yes, he's a good salesman. Yes, he knows how to make controversy. Yes, he knows how to, create a narrative about, animal-based foods, but I actually find him quite funny. Why we look at things from different angles. I look at it from a whole foods, plant-based point of view. He looks at it from a not even carnivore anymore, animal-based point of view. I think realistically we both want the same thing, even though we're looking at the science and the data in completely different ways, and the data and the science points in the direction of what I am saying, and that's not to be like, hey, believe me, it's just what the data and the science says, because we do know as well that Paul does cherry pick data. He cherry picks a lot of data. One week it'll be rat studies, and then the next week he'll be like, well, rat studies don't really work. We'd rely on these studies, as long as they fit his narrative and they fit his, the cherry picking he's doing at that moment. Basically, he wants health for all humans. He wants people to be healthier, and I don't see a problem with that. And the way he's going, the way he says it, would be the healthier option to what the majority of people are doing. But that's also the same with what I'm doing as well. However, there's less risk of chronic disease with it, and we see that through, you know, studies over time. I appreciate Paul. I think what he's doing is great. I don't think how he's doing it or what he's promoting is great, but realistically what he wants is to see people healthier. He wants to see people healthy. He doesn't want to see people living with like chronic disease, type 2 diabetes, etc., etc. I think he's probably a very charismatic man also. I think we'd probably get along, you know, different views, but I think we'd get along. He seems like a great guy. You know, he'd be a great guy to go for a little surf with. When you take out his crazy opinions, he's just a guy trying to live his best life, and he's doing it in the way he sees. He did an episode on endometriosis. I did. It was the 3rd episode with Annette Henry on all things endometriosis and her experience and how she managed to cure it for herself. So if you want to check it out, you can. But the question will be, you did an episode on endometriosis. Will you be doing more on women's health? I found it very useful. I want to try do more on women's health. I've been doing it on general health at the moment. I have done some women's health, and I have done some men's health as well. In a recent episode actually with Dr. Aaron Spitz about penis health. However, I am going into various different topics. So, you know, we've done episodes around, you know, pregnancy, preconception, post-conception, trimesters, postpartum. We've done endometriosis, we've done kids. However, there's a few in the pipeline. One coming up, I think the week after next, which will be about PCOS. And then we've also got some coming up to do with things like chronic fatigue, perimenopause, menopause, and many others. And hopefully that will be helpful, because I know a lot of you have been asking for various subjects to be taken into account. And the same with guys as well. Same with guys. So we're going to get a variety of different experts on to speak about those subjects that you want. Do you have a favorite guest? Well, do I have a favorite guest? That's like, you know, people picking children, isn't it? Are you meant to have a favorite guest? I have favorite episodes. I have favorite episodes. That's all I'm going to say. No, I love all my guests. I love the fact they've given me their time. They've given me their expertise. They've given me that information. They've given time to, you know, break down all the information that's available to help you. Do I have guests that would be? Do I have guests that would be more informative than others? Yes. But I love them all. However, I do have favorite episodes, and what I can do is I can give you a top 5. So I would say Jamie Logan is one of my favorites. Ella Majors is also one of my favorites. Ollie Weatherall is also one of my favorites. Dr. Aaron Spitz. I said top 5, and now a ton have come rushing to mind. I think either Maxim or Robert Cheek. There's 2 Robert Cheek episodes to choose from, but you can tell me which one's your favorite. But I think, yeah, I just gave you kind of 6, I guess. Any episodes that you haven't released? There's about 4. One of them is very much because the quality and the sound was so bad. This is when I first started. I didn't have a good microphone. There wasn't good internet connection, and luckily I managed to save it, a tiny bit of it, and I released it in the Christmas episode. However, I wish I could have uploaded that. That was with, as you're probably knowing him on Instagram as Marshall Fent. It was a great episode, however, could never be released because the quality was so bad. I couldn't even listen to the first 5 seconds, it was just screeching, which was really annoying because it was such a good episode. However, there are episodes I haven't released because there's some stuff said in them that I don't think is either appropriate or I think is misinformation. Not think it's misinformation, it is pure misinformation, and I want to protect you as the guest from misinformation. That's what this podcast is about. I want to protect, and I don't want you being reeled into information that's not true, that could, you know, be a bit detrimental to your health if you were to take it on. So absolutely not will I ever release those, and I'm not going to say who they are either. I don't think that's fair. Which then actually led on to the next question, which I saw your article on misinformation. That's also on Substack. How do you know if somebody is spreading it without having knowledge of the subject in depth? It's a hard one because I don't have knowledge in everything in depth. So, you know, I vet these people as much as possible. And when I release the episode or I edit the episode, I look up these things in depth to see if there's, you know, truth to it, if it's something that seems a bit out there, a bit crazy. And luckily there hasn't really been much of it. I think most people on here are here to, you know, give the right information. Yes, there's always going to be nuances to information and the science is always, you know, contradicting and saying itself. But what we're seeing at the moment as well with like podcasts like, you know, Diary of a CEO or Joe Rogan, that there's a lot of misinformation spread and people are taking that on and they're having a lot of difficulty. And I think it's becoming detrimental how much misinformation there is because people aren't willing to or don't know where to turn, which is a shame. So I like to try and keep mine as balanced as possible, you know, point out the nuances. If I need to, I will push back because I do have the knowledge to push back on some things. There has been an episode recently where something was said. I'm not going to say the name of the guest. It is still in the podcast. However, there is a disclaimer on the episode. Because I didn't know how to push back on that one, which was, I will give you the quote, which was that hot drinks cause tongue cancer. Now, I had a bit of a problem with that one, because when you actually look into it, there's a small, minute bit of studying around it, which says it can, but very rare. So that bit is true. But when you look at the large percentile of the world that drink hot drinks every day and the large percentage of people, or the small percentage of people that said with tongue cancer, I don't think they can be correlated. And I think the science is a bit wavy on that. And for instance, if you live in the UK like me, or you live in the Western world, you drink a lot of coffee or tea, or, you know, even in, you know, Asian countries that drinking a lot of like, you know, black tea. We're having hot drinks every day, and tongue cancer seems to be very rare in amongst all the different types of cancers that are coming out. So I think it would be wrong to say that yes, hot drinks cause tongue cancer. I think it was disingenuous to be said. I don't think it's true, and I don't think there's enough information on there for it to be true. And it's, yeah. However, there's a small amount of studying on it. But I think we can see from, you know, everyday experience that isn't the case. Like, correct me if I'm wrong, some of you may know people with, or have known with tongue cancer, but you very rarely hear about it. And then is that correlated to hot drinks, or is that correlated to, you know, things like smoking? who knows? But that was one where I've had to kind of put a disclaimer in the notes to be like, I want you to take this with a pinch of salt. I don't think this is the truth or alluding to the truth. When you traveled, what countries did you go to and what were your favorite? I have traveled for a while. I actually flew from London into Houston. Spent 3-4 days in Houston before I actually flew off for my travels. Houston's an amazing city and I love it to pieces. I want to go back. From there, I then flew to Peru, landed in Peru, went into Bolivia, then went back into Peru, then went into Ecuador, spent a huge amount of time, quite a few months in Colombia, made my way into Panama, to Costa Rica, to Nicaragua, El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, Mexico, and into the States. Did a road trip around the States, or at least a lot of the West Coast and a bit of, the Midwest. Went into Canada, came back down, went and did a bit more of the States. Still would like to do a lot more. I do love it there. And then flew from there to Australia, lived in Australia for a few years, and then moved to Bali for a bit. I have left Bali at the moment. At the moment I'm back in England, but traveling at one point will continue. But they're the countries that I went to on those travels. Colombia was by far my favorite. It's full of culture, it was just very vibrant. I loved every second of it, and I think it gets a bad reputation for things that happened in the past. However, everybody's very friendly. The food is amazing. Also, the vegan scene is amazing. Amazing food, amazing culture, amazing people. Wouldn't change it for the world. I had a great experience there. I met you when you were head chef in Sydney, and you convinced me to try your vegan poached eggs. Vegan poached eggs Benedict. I tried to convince a lot of people to eat that because I thought it was a miracle creation that I had managed. It tasted amazing. I can't give away the recipe on here. But basically what I did was I created, vegan poached eggs out of Whole Foods, or near enough Whole Foods. Made them taste like eggs. They broke and heated up like eggs, and melted, and the inside came out like the middle of a poached egg, and had that on, I can't think of the word now, English muffins. Had that on English muffins with then some hollandaise sauce as well, and some tempeh bacon. It was great. It was a good seller, and I tried to convince everybody to do it, because although I didn't invent the egg that they had been created, I managed to do the one thing that we don't think was possible, which was heat it up without it melting. And we did that, and then we started selling these poached eggs, and they were great. Yes, they were vegan. I can't tell you what was inside them or how they're made, because I've got an NDA on those. But I know how to make them, and if I'm ever near somebody who wants them made and they have the ingredients, I will make them. But yeah, and real healthy for you, not made of anything weird or wonderful that people assume that our food's made out of. But thank you, I really appreciate it. Also, love to know who you are. I did make friends with a lot of people when I was working there, because the kitchen overlooked the restaurant, which was nice. Yeah, I helped to create the new menu that was there, and hopefully you all really enjoy it if you go there. I do miss the food there as well. It is great. As a nutritionist, is there things that you are still imperfect at? Is there things that you still struggle with? Absolutely. I think it would be wrong for me to say that each and every single one of us is perfect and we eat perfectly every single day. Yes, I eat a, 90% whole foods, plant-based diet. Yes, I eat some vegan meats and alternatives and things like that, vegan pizza, burgers once in a while. However, what is something that I am imperfect at? I would like to say it's, a bit of balance. There's a few things I think. Any supplementation that may be needed. I'm not a great rememberer at doing those. I know I tell people to do that all the time, but yeah, like we all forget once in a while, and that happens. But it's no big issue. Also, I am a sucker for snacking. So when I am cooking, sometimes you're just out there trying to snack on little things that you find in the fridge. Something I still need to work on. It doesn't really happen as much anymore, but it happens. You're hungry. When you start cooking, you're hungry. So like, I just need something to tie me over now. And maybe, a little bit of dark chocolate or a cracker or, a few other bits and pieces like that. It's never anything bad, but I think there's a big thing with snacking. I think during the day as well. Sometimes, you're doing what you're doing, you get a bit bored and you're like, oh, what can I reach for? It's more that boredom comfort eating. So yeah, I do have struggles. As much as anybody has their, everybody has their vices. And mine would be snacking. Okay, yeah. So there's a coffee shop back home called Plant Fest. Go there if you're ever in Hadley in Essex, run by Stephen and Harriet. Great place. However, me and my mum love that place. It's completely plant-based, and you can get, sandwiches, you can get cakes, you can get cookies, you can get literally everything. I go in there for my coffee, and when I go for my coffee, there's always a huge abundance of beautiful cookies and cakes. And whenever I'm in there, I'm kind of like, oh yeah, I need a cookie. I don't need a cookie, but I need a cookie and I need it now. I think only a few weeks ago there was a cookie with little mini eggs on top and a chocolate cornflake nest thing. Incredible. I needed it. And I'd like to say there's nothing wrong with having those things, ever. Just not every day. And if it was up to me, I'd be having those every single day. But yeah, plant-based, amazing. Go there if you're ever around there. Absolutely stunning food. Really nice people to hang out with as well. And everything is made with love and care. But yeah, so snacking, pick up random things when I don't need them. And yeah, I think that's very much, I think my downfalls. Any advice for newcomers starting a plant-based diet? Don't try to do it overnight. It works for some people, it really does, but you don't want to go overnight and then feel unsustained, unfulfilled, and then go back. You don't want to go back on yourself. So my advice is go slowly. Cut out things, maybe swap your breakfast over, maybe swap your lunch over, and then make your dinners. Or just add more plants to your dinners until, if you are still eating meat, it's the smallest part of the meal until you can just kind of cut it out. So for instance, make things that you're used to. So let's say, for instance, bolognese or a chili. Instead of the mince, use lentils. Everything else in that is still exactly the same. Everything else is already plant-based. Just swap the meat for lentils. Easy little swaps like that. And I think the main thing is easing your gut into it. So, eating up to 30 plants per week, 30 different varieties of plants per week. And that can be pretty daunting to a lot of people, but I think when you realize that the amount of plants we can eat and the variety and what we can use in different meals, I think you'll be surprised. For instance, my breakfast, most days, and has been for years, oats with some coconut water. Coconut water, I can't count that, but on the fingers. So oats. I will then have blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, grapes. I will have flax seeds, chia seeds, pumpkin seeds, sunflower seeds, hemp seeds. I will have a little scoop of peanut butter. Can we count that? I think we can. I normally go with crunchy, so it's still got a bit of peanuts, in it. What else do I stick on? Okay, even with that, there is still now 11 plants. That's just one breakfast. Various different plants. So let's say, for instance, that you do a poke bowl or a Buddha bowl for lunch. Let's say you add, carrots, avocado, rice, radishes, cucumber, jalapenos, a bit of seaweed, or nori sheets, whatever. What else did you put in there? Well, that's another 7. So already that day you've hit 18. So eating 30 plants a week, it's not that hard when you think about it. It just seems pretty daunting when people say it. So wouldn't worry too much. Just add more plants over time. The more plants, the better. If you've eaten a very omnivorous diet and not much fruit or veg in the past, that you may find there's a bit of bloating, but that will calm down after a week or so. That's just your body getting used to it. That's your enzymes breaking it down, especially when it comes to things like beans and legumes and grains, where you may not be used to eating them so much. So let's say you've never really eaten lentils or chickpeas, you may feel a bit like inside the stomach, a bit gassy. That's the word for it. I wouldn't worry too much about it. Next question was about protein powders. Do I recommend them? And I recommend them if you've got a goal. To get your protein fix on a whole foods plant-based diet isn't that hard. It really isn't that hard, especially if you're going with a recommended daily allowance, which is your body weight in kilograms times by 0.9. That's the minimum you need to have. And then anything over that is a benefit. I normally myself, I'm probably, my body weight times by 1.6 maybe. It really depends on the goals at the time. However, if for instance that you're, looking to perform at its best, maybe you're taking on, an athletic goal, or you're trying to maybe lose weight and lower the calories, but still get a higher amount of protein, then a protein powder, absolutely fine. I'm not against them whatsoever. I think they can be beneficial, and they can help people that may struggle to eat a lot. Or let's say for instance they need to get a higher amount of protein for what they're doing, but food's not going to be suffice. I would also say that vegans and plant-based people aren't always the only people that have protein powders. It's a billion-dollar industry, and vegans and plant-based eaters are 3 to 4% of the population in some countries, maybe more, maybe less. It's a billion-dollar industry. We're not the ones consuming all the protein powder when the majority of them are whey. So I wouldn't really worry, because to be seen down as you getting your protein from a protein powder when the majority of the world doesn't. Now, I don't have an issue with protein powders. I think try get the cleaner the better. and maybe get a blend. So let's say like a brown rice and sunflower seed blend or something like that. Those ones with the right amount of amino acids and amino qualities, and higher in leucine. But no problem with protein powders. I think they are beneficial. Do I recommend supplements? I recommend some supplements. Once again, I said B12. I also think that protein powders can be beneficial to some people, depending on what somebody's eating. If you're eating a lot of seeds for your omega-3, I would maybe consider taking a blood test to see if your conversion rate of, ALA to EPA and DHA is high. If it's not, then I would consider maybe doing a algae-based supplement or eating seaweed. Iodine, I would also recommend taking if you're not eating iodine. I think for everybody as well. One of those nutrients, once again, we don't get enough of as a population. That's why we see things like iodized salt these days, and in some countries they put iodine supplementation into bread. You just have to these days, unfortunately. Iodine we need is beneficial for our thyroid health. So if you want to take like a sea kelp tablet that has iodine and omega-3, amazing. Do I think you need any other supplements? It depends. If you're training really hard and you sweat a lot, maybe a magnesium supplement. But that's really, for those really high performers. Maybe if you have struggle sleeping, but you can take that instead of a sleeping pill, and hopefully that may do something for you. Is there any other supplements that I would consider? Vitamin D3. We live in a world where we're not going out in the sun as much, so we're inside the house quite a lot, or you're wearing a lot of clothes. So even people in Australia that get a lot of sun still have vitamin D3 deficiencies. It comes from the sun. We're just in a place where we don't get as much as we used to. We're wearing a lot more clothes, we're sitting in offices, we're sitting indoors, we're doing all sorts. So unless you're like topless in the sun a lot of the year round, I think a vitamin D3 supplement is beneficial. I've heard some people say zinc, and I don't think that is a needed supplement. I think we're just making things seem harder than they are. You can get those from Whole Foods. There's no reason to be taking a supplement for that. This is the last question. Do I have any podcasts that I listen to and that I recommend? I listen to a lot of podcasts around various different subjects. Rich Roll, I listen to a lot. Listen to a lot of Simon Hill. I do listen to Diary of a CEO when he's not talking about nutrition, because I know it's just only going to aggravate me. Listen to Modern Wisdom. Great podcast. Hate to say it, I do enjoy Joe Rogan sometimes. I think it's actually a quite good podcast. I just would take everything on there with a pinch of salt. I wouldn't say it's, accurate with information, especially around nutrition. And the people that he has on can be questionable. However, there is some good conversations on there surrounding other topics, which I think are great. Do I listen to any more? Let me just check my Spotify and see if I listen to anything else. I listen to the Andrew Huberman or the Huberman Lab podcast once in a while, and there we go. The Bloody Vegans podcast. That's a shout out there for Sue, who's graced this podcast 3 times already, and she's now the host of that. So as the supportive friend I am, listening to that, and you know what, it's a really good podcast. I feel like she was a good takeover from Jim. I think she does really well. and I think she's having some good conversations. And I'm also her first guest on there as well, or have been. She's done far more since then. So, you know, go over there and give that a listen if you want to. If you want to see somebody try to, you know, create a conversation while being very jet lagged and like falling asleep on screen, that's the one to go for. But yeah, those are my main podcasts. I actually had somebody ask me the other day if I listened to my own podcast, and I can 100% say to this day that I've never listened to a single episode of my own podcast, apart from when I'm going through editing. Once you're editing, you just hear it, but I've never sat down and listened to me. I don't want to. However, that is all the questions, and I think I will do another one of these soon. I don't know in what format, because somebody did mention the other day that they did like the Christmas episode where I kind of collated all the episodes and bits that I've learned from that year. However, we have now doubled the episodes already of last year, so, and that took at least, you know, 6 days to create that episode. So I think I'm going to need to do one halfway through the year, just to kind of like a half year breakdown of what's happened. So I think that's going to be a lot of fun, and I think I'll do one of those. But in what format, I don't think it's what I've learned from the year. It'd be something, I don't know yet. And also when we hit another, you know, substantial amount of followers, I will do another Q&A, another one like this, or in some format, way, shape or form. That is me. However, that is all of the questions that we could get done today. That being said, I don't know how to round off this podcast, because normally it's me saying goodbye to somebody. So maybe I'll start it off or end it off how I would normally start it off. I'm your host. This is Plant Fueled. I'm your host, Callum Weir. Let's round this out. Peace and plants.